Hello and welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to look at our second Brave Arsenal weapon, and I know I had said we were going to look at Edge Transit or Falling Guillotine next, but I actually like Mountaintop enough that we're going to skip those for now, and we're going to do Mountaintop second. So Mountaintop is just made available from Shaxx. You can get it pretty quickly. It took about 10 waves of onslaught using a chain reaction grenade launcher with a wave frame, and once you get it, you get a curated roll from Shaxx. It's not very good, so I would recommend still farming for one, and that's what we're going to do in this video. We're going to test some different rolls. I'll give you my personal recommendation for Mountaintop, and we'll look at a few of the different god rolls and essentially which perks I think are best for Mountaintop. But before we begin, if you do like this video and find it helpful, a like and subscribe are greatly appreciated. Thank you for watching. Let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so the first thing I do want to do before we talk perks is just talk about what's different about Mountaintop. Micro Missile is no longer actually a perk, it is now the intrinsic frame of the weapon, which means that Mountaintop has room for random rolled perks, which it did not before. The main thing to note is that Micro Missile basically is a lightweight frame grenade launcher that fires in a straight line instead of an arc projectile. And this basically makes Mountaintop play a lot more like a baby rocket launcher that uses special ammo than a grenade launcher necessarily. The one thing to note is that Mountaintop's splash damage is actually very, very low. I even would go so far as to say is like Mountaintop is almost a precision weapon, not in that it needs precision hits to work, but for it to do any real meaningful damage, you do need a direct hit on the target you're trying to deal damage to. It's just kind of the way it works as a micro missile grenade launcher as opposed to one that you could bounce and usually has a decent little blast radius to it. The other thing that's new in Mountaintop is they drastically reduced the self damage, but they've added some knockback to it. The thing is, the rocket jump on Mountaintop I think is a little bit of a gimmick, but if you jump right before you do it, you can get quite a bit of airtime, especially on a Warlock glide. You can use it to really, really launch yourself, but I don't think it's necessarily all that useful. What I do think is that with the drastically reduced self-damage on Mountaintop, you can use it to really, really cover yourself if you get surrounded. You can use it to bounce up and out with a rocket jump, or even clear out the adds that are surrounding you. But I don't really think the Mountaintop rocket jump is going to be something that's going to really, really break the game or be a super widespread feature. I just think it's almost a quality of life change just now that it does less damage and can move the player a little bit. But in actual content, I don't feel like it's actually that useful of a mechanic. The first perk that I'm going to recommend you try to get on all Mountaintops if you can is actually going to be Spike Grenades. Spike Grenades did get nerfed for heavy grenade launchers to where it's not nearly as impactful as it was before, but on special grenade launchers it is still about an 8% damage increase on direct hits. And given how Mountaintop kind of works, I will say the splash damage on Mountaintop is very, very, very low and a very, very small radius. Mountaintop basically requires direct hits to deal any meaningful damage, which is fine really given just how much damage it does compared to other grenade launchers. I think it's fine that it has very, very little explosion radius. But yeah, so I would recommend Spike Grenades if you can get it. If not, then really whatever's not sticky grenades should be fine, although you will be missing out on a bit of damage, which we will show in the testing later in this video. Then for your column 3 perks, I actually have to recommend Autoloading Holster or Overflow, and I'll explain that in a second. Although you could also definitely get away with Lead from Gold if you are doing something like a Grandmaster Nightfall and want more ammo, or maybe even Demolitionist, although Demolitionist is not my favorite, only because it gets you 1 reload, whereas the other perks I feel like just get a lot more mileage. Picking up ammo with Overflow will get you 2 shots in the mag, although once the enhanceable versions are available, you should be able to get 3 in Mountaintop. So I would recommend Overflow if you want to be able to do that for really, really high burst output. But if you're going to use this weapon as like a swap rotation, I would personally have to recommend Autoloading Holster because it's just like the go-to perk for weapon swapping. Then for your column 4 perks, I think your best options are Vorpal Weapon, potentially Frenzy if you can keep it stacked, especially going into something like a boss damage phase. But my personal recommendation for this is going to be Recombination, which I'll show in the tests in a bit. But Recombination I found just had the most consistent, highest damage output, even to the point that it took quite a while for Vorpal or Frenzy to catch up to the bonus damage on the first shot, because you kind of put all your eggs in that first shot, and if you're able to get that hit, you'll get big, big damage, and it does actually take a Vorpal roll quite a bit of time to catch up. So we'll do a little bit of damage testing with this. The thing is, Mountaintop is going to be here compared to the previous kind of best breach loading grenade launcher for boss damage, which would be a Wilderflight with Spike Grenades and Vorpal Weapon. This Wilderflight has Spike Grenades, does not have Vorpal Weapon. We added our 15% for Vorpal Weapon with doing the math. So Wilderflight shoots 2 grenades that hit for 8,433 and 17,115 each times 2, and then we multiplied that value by 1.15 for the 15% that Vorpal would give, and the damage that we got out of that was 58,760 per shot, assuming both grenades had direct hits on the boss. From there, I started testing Mountaintops. I tested one that had Vorpal, one that had Recombination, both of these without spike grenades, and then another one that had Vorpal, and another one that had Recombination, both of which also did have spike grenades. Just keep in mind that Vorpal Weapon and Frenzy both give a 15% damage bonus for special weapons. Frenzy gives a few other stats, but given that auto-loading holster should be your go-to, you probably won't get that much out of Frenzy's reload compared to just having Vorpal's free damage on bosses. They're both good, but their damage values will actually be the same. For the first Mountaintop, which was Recombination but no spike grenades, it did 48,341 on impact and 89,220 on explosion for a total of 137,561 on the Recombination shot, and then on the shots without Recombination active, we did 24,170 on impact and it's 44,610 on impact. This totaled to 68,780 without Recombination up, which is actually pretty consistent with Recombination since you get 10% bonus for each stack up to 10 at 100% bonus damage on that first stack. Then for a Mountaintop that has no spike grenades but does have Vorpal Weapon, you'll do 27,796 on impact and 51,302 on the explosion for a total of 79,098 on every shot as long as you're hitting a boss. Frenzy will do the same damage but against every target regardless of whether or not it is a boss. From there, I want to talk about the DPS of these two rolls, and all you need to know really is with the 2.05 second reload speed, Vorpal Weapon on a no spike roll does 39,352 damage per second, and that is linear across the entire reserve because you can shoot, reload, and every shot does the same, and every reload takes the same amount of time. However, with Recombination, it gets a little odd because the longer you deal damage, the more the damage per second value falls off since that first shot does so much more damage and the reload is the same, but every shot after the first does half the damage of the first one, assuming you have times 10. All you really need to know is that for the Vorpal Weapon roll to pass the Recombination roll, you need a really large number of shots to hit. The basic math behind it is that since Recombination gives you 100% bonus damage, it makes that first shot the equivalent of hitting 2 shots, and for the 15% bonus on Vorpal to add up to being more than that, you would need at least 7 shots to hit. Which does kind of end up meaning that you will probably not in the course of a full damage phase get to this point, since even though 7 shots of Mountaintop isn't quite as much as it sounds like, you gotta remember that you're gonna be emptying your heavy weapon first. Your heavy weapon is always going to do more damage than this. So you're probably just switching to Mountaintop very briefly while auto-loading holster or something runs on your heavy weapon, and you're probably not going to really get 7 swaps between this and your heavy weapons. So I do think Recombination is probably better, although there is nothing wrong with Vorpal. Recombination I also just thought was very, very useful for taking out really, really beefy targets as well. That extra damage is really crazy for a special weapon. So I personally feel like I have to recommend Recombination as the better perk, although I am keeping one of the exact same role but with Vorpal Weapon, just because I do think there may be cases where you are hitting a boss enough times that Vorpal may be more worth it than Recombination. Then the second little test that I wanted to show was kind of just the difference that spike grenades does still make on a special grenade launcher. So in this case, our Recombination roll with spike grenades did 47,434 on impact, and 100,472 on detonation, which was a total of 154,906 on the fully stacked Recombination first shot. After that, you would drop down to 23,717 on impact and 53,736 on detonation, giving you a total after Recombination was used of 77,453. Then, when you had a roll that had Vorpal Weapon and spike grenades, you would do 27,796 on impact and 57,520 on detonation, which gave you a total damage output of 85,316 per shot, which is still pretty good. And then when we look at the DPS on these, the values are kind of similar, but a lot of that is the fact that Mountaintop is a single shot weapon and has to reload so frequently, so I don't even really think it is going to necessarily be a DPS weapon per se, as much as it is going to be used to swap. And that's part of why I recommend auto-loading holster, is it lets you skip the fact that you have to reload this weapon every single time you shoot. As we saw, the no spike Vorpal weapon roll was 39k DPS, it's like 39.3k, and this one is actually 41,618, so 41.6k DPS, which is, you know, a little bit better, but surprisingly close for a 15% buff, and that's really because you have to reload Mountaintop so many times that the DPS is similar anyway. Now, our Recombination rolls DPS is a bit higher. It starts out a bit closer to like 50k, and then the more you shoot, it drops down because, again, the reloads kind of bring everything together, and eventually, after a certain point, the Vorpal weapon roll overtakes the total damage output and the DPS of the Recombination roll, but it's pretty far in that I don't necessarily think it makes Vorpal a better choice than Recombination, just given how few times you're likely to actually fire this thing at a boss. Well, that is all I have for y'all today, so if there's anything else you'd like to see, feel free to put it in the comments down below. Thank you for watching. Good luck on getting your God Roll Mountaintops to drop, and I will see you guys in the next one. Like I said, we're still looking at some more Brave Arsenal stuff, so I'm hoping to get Edge Transit and Falling Guillotine out this week, just depending on how busy I am. Then next week, we have Hammerhead and Forbearance releasing. I don't think I'll do a video on Forbearance necessarily, because it is extraordinarily similar to the version that already exists. I might do a YouTube short for that, but I don't think it necessarily needs its own full-length video. But Hammerhead I'm excited about, because there's some cool perk rolls on Hammerhead, and I do kind of want to get a video put together on those, kind of compare it to other LMGs that are really strong right now. So I will try to get one out for Hammerhead as well. I won't waste any more of y'all's time. Thank you for watching. See y'all later.